So hello everybody. So my name is Mikko Raatikainen from University of Helsinki, and here I present with my co-authors Elina, Kettunen and Tommi Mikkonen, and Marko, Komssi, Salonen, and Timo, Lehtonen, a paper about state of the practice about application programming interfaces, APIs, as a case study research.
Hello, very briefly. So my name is Timo Lehtonen and I work as a senior software designer at Solita, and I'm one of the authors of this paper.
Professor Tommi Mikkonen from University of Helsinki, and I'm also one of the authors of this paper.
And finally, Marko Komssi from FCQ.
So as a background, so APIs during the past decade or two have become really key asset and prevalent in today's software systems and services. And this is based on a research project that these organizations were also participating as well, and they considered APIs as very relevant from them as well. There are really large diversity that what APIs are about. So basically what I differentiate here is that web APIs basically, or practically REST APIs nowadays of web services, and then small kind of traditional static APIs that appear in programming languages, libraries, frameworks, and so forth. So it's APIs, since they have been in the programming languages, they are nothing new per se. So they have been in among us for several decades. And there are now several different methods, practices, and even textbooks have been published about APIs, their development, and so forth. However, there's the other side of the coin, that what is the state of the practice in the industry about APIs relating to API development. So the problem that we are addressing in this study was that how are APIs technically developed and managed in software industry, and what are the main challenges? So focus mostly on technical aspects. And there are quite a few studies about the API users viewpoint, but this is more about the developer owner viewpoints. And therefore we conducted a case study by interviewing representatives from 4 organizations. So we approached four organizations. We purposefully selected 2 consultancy companies who develop software and APIs for their customers. So Solita and Digia, both are mid-size or large in Nordic countries, operating in Northern Europe. And then there's 2 product companies operating in international markets, developing their own products or services. So security company, F-Secure, and Vertex, who develops different software solutions for construction domain. So we conducted an interview with the experienced software in all of these companies, and these respondents have been participating in several projects. So one finding is that what I already mentioned, is that the diversity of APIs. So we identified 5 different scenarios. So first is this one-to-one integration APIs that especially consultancy companies do for their customers, and they integrate different one system to another. So it's a pretty trivial and technical case, basically some good operations. Then a bit broader context scenario is that there's a partner APIs where the API is provided to some partner organizations. Typically there are a few or several partner organizations, however they're usually very familiar with the domain and the software that is provided through the APIs, functionality, features, whatever is provided over that. So that's as well as pretty technologically savvy people who understand what they're doing. Third scenario is open APIs, which mostly consultancy companies do, and typically nowadays for public organizations, governmental organizations. And usually it's about publishing the some data, publicly available data. All of these three cases are practically always web APIs nowadays based on REST. The fourth scenario is internal APIs between products, especially if you have a large set of different systems or services, products, subsystems, and they have internal APIs between the products for reuse. In this case, there are web APIs and sometimes static APIs. Both exist. Web APIs appear probably more prevalent nowadays. And so the fifth scenario, as already mentioned, is this old static APIs. What we found out that there's a difference is how these kind of APIs should be done, but actually what the research is pretty silent about how this should be taken into account when developing guidelines or practices or whatever for API development of different scenarios. So one takeaway of this study is that whenever considering doing some research on APIs, so take account the diversity of the APIs, this kind of diversity or otherwise describe the context and usage. Well, in general, some technical details, but the API development management nowadays is pretty well supported by the technologies. I mean, development, deployment, DevOps, deployment of cloud management, it's pretty straightforward. Technologies are naturally developing pretty rapidly, so pretty hard to say any strict reference framework or something about technologies, but basically everything is based on cloud nowadays. DevOps being a state of the practice, the speed of the DevOps is more an issue. And actually the many characteristics, including solutions and problems, are inherited from the background system for the APIs as well. So in technological sense, it's more about the adoption and selection of the technology. And then the challenges that will be identified. So first of all, this API is often mentioned in the literature as a challenge, but it's technologically it's not a challenge per se, but it's a challenge for planning how to design evolution so that it's not the ad hoc, which usually results in a lot of laborious things to do. Another challenge perhaps is that document and the usability are practically a bit under-addressed in the practice. So there are in the research means to do the documentation usability, but they have been not adopted in practice. And another issue here is that considering the developer journey from novice developers to experienced developers, so perhaps it's focused more on the very technical details of experienced developers that are addressed in the APIs. Naturally, as I said earlier, it depends on what kind of API you're developing. So if you're doing one-to-one integration, documentation, or usability are not issues as such. And the final thing is API management is like something that customers, especially consultancy companies, are requesting nowadays. There are nowadays means that how to do the API management, but the actual problem is that what should be done in the API management in business content, business sense, that what is relevant to do, and how rigorously API management should be enforced, and what should be done when, and so forth. So that's the key contribution from myself, and I give the now turn to my co-authors to reflect their views especially from their company's perspectives or experiences.
Yeah, thank you, Mikko. I could comment on behalf of Solita, which is a consultancy company which builds systems for customers, for example, on the public sector. So I agree with what Mikko said, that API technology is still an emerging technology. It's going to be more used more and more used all the time. So you could say that it's kind of a default option to have APIs in any system. And the challenges, they truly are in the things that Mikko already mentioned: API management, then documentation and usability of the APIs. And actually, one more thing we have noticed lately is that data modeling is very important too. So when we are publishing APIs of the data, we should take care of data modeling too. So I guess it's partly API management kind of issue, but that's something very, very important. And yeah, what about Marko? What do you see important at F-Secure?
For APIs, maybe the biggest thing for us, or the biggest challenge for us, was that last 15 years we have tried to become as fast and nimble, and 15 years ago we call it agile. We have tried to become as flexible and customer oriented as possible, and we use that mindset and thinking for APIs as well. And when customers and partners had demand, or they needed some APIs for doing their operations and serving their customers, we did APIs for them. And soon we realized that it needs to be developed further and make changes, and making changes for APIs, and especially when there are multiple partners using the same set of APIs, then it becomes a huge problem. And there are of course issues of backward compatibility, but also how to manage those different versions and how to do changes. And then it becomes even more chaotic when there are different abstractions levels and things like that, and so on. And therefore we have made a huge emphasis on that APIs needs also road mapping practices similar to our product planning, that basically we can't just do things based on demand and quickly do a set of APIs, and then we need to think, we need to have a long-term perspective for these, and think how at least think a bit forward, not just based on the urgent demand. But I think that has been maybe the biggest thing to understand, that this is different game. This needs different mindset than the normal traditional product development. And also the second thing is that we also need to not just do a set of APIs, but we need to also understand that what's the right abstraction levels, and we also noticed that the same topics of usability and documentation and naming of APIs and everything needs to be coherent, and everything needs to be built for as good usable product, even with videos and everything. But I think those were the most important stuff, and of course we are still struggling, but within the last 2 years we have learned a lot, and we have hopefully progressed as well.
Yeah, that's interesting that you mentioned API road mapping as one tool. So what would you actually put on the roadmap? Is it business value or customer value or the features, or how do you build a good roadmap for APIs?
That's a good question, and I rather leave audience curious that there needs to be further research on that topic.